Welcome, everybody, to the September issue of the South Dakota Forest Health Workshop Series. This month, we are discussing conifer species for landscapes and windbreaks, kind of pairing well with last month's workshop on shrub selection for landscapes and windbreaks, a workshop that can be found on our YouTube playlist. That playlist, or a link to that playlist, is currently in our chat box for this workshop, so feel free to check that out after today's workshop or at a later time. We're thrilled you can be joining us. Dr. Ball will be discussing conifer species for South Dakota. This workshop does have credentials available for both ISA certified arborists and SAF certified foresters. If you are an ISA certified arborist, please stick around for the end of the workshop. Dr. Ball will put up a code on his last slide for you to self-report your CEU. If you're an ISA or if you are a SAF certified forester, please put your credentials in the chat box so that we can have them recorded and submitted as a group. With that said, we are always interested in your ideas, your opinions. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box throughout the workshop. We should have some time at the end to go over as many questions as possible. And if you need any more information, both Dr. Ball's and my contact info will be made available at the end of the workshop. This workshop is being recorded. As I mentioned, that playlist on YouTube, we add all of our new workshops to that playlist. So keep an eye on that in the coming days to watch this one again and again until you get all your conifer species memorized, or at least you understand what would work for you. With that, Dr. Ball, I'll turn it to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Tony. And that was quite an intro there. Yeah, hopefully you don't have to see it more than a couple of times, but maybe you'll find it useful to go back as a reference. So we'll get started here. And we did, as Tony mentioned, we looked at deciduous trees, then we looked at shrubs, and now we're looking at conifers. And to take a look at what can grow in the general area for our landscapes and for our windbreaks. Let's see here. Let me click this out again here. Boom. There we go. Well, we're coming up to that season. Everybody's thinking of Christmas trees, but that's not really the point of today. Though I will say one of the things that I do enjoy is the annual harvest of the South Dakota Capitol Christmas tree. And surprisingly, that's only about 6 weeks away. So, then that's the holiday season's beginning. I know it's hard to believe when we're all sitting here baking at about 85 degrees right now, but winter is coming. Well, let's take a look at conifers, and I'm actually going to start out with one that most students know it's a gymnosperm, a conifer, but a lot of people don't realize it, and that's ginkgo. That's a picture of a beautiful ginkgo I took in Beijing a number of years ago. They are native to southwestern China, despite the fact they're a deciduous tree, but nobody has found them in the wild. Only in gardens, and they were planted extensively in China, as you see here in another garden, and in Japan. And now, of course, they're planted everywhere. By now, since about the 1500s, they started bringing seedlings in that back and planted them in the UK and other areas. It's a pretty nice tree. There's a picture of one as a street tree in Pierre. So they're really a zone 5, zone 4 tree. We have a nice one at Northern State University in Aberdeen, and there's a small one, but doing well at North Dakota State University in Fargo, and we have them growing out in the Black Hills and certainly in Sioux Falls and in Yankton. Here's a nice one growing at McCory Gardens in Brookings. They have that beautiful fan-shaped leaf, which is so attractive, but they're pretty nice little trees. And here's one even being used as an espalier in Sioux Falls. The foliage is fantastic. It has that nice fan shape, hence the scientific name, Ginkgo biloba. You'll never find holes in these leaves. Nothing attacks it. Zero zip, nada. If all we planted were ginkgos in the state, I'd be out of a job because there wouldn't be any forest pests. It is a well-defended tree. It's been around for millions of years. In fact, a trivia note would be, is it native to South Dakota. And yes, if we go back far enough, there are fossil records of the tree here. Um, the claim to fame to this tree is its fall color. And unfortunately, in the Dakotas, we rarely see it. The reason being is our frosts come too soon. There was probably the nicest fall color that I've seen in South Dakota. That's on one on our campus. That about the third week of October, we still hadn't had a killing frost, and the tree was just beautiful. But again, that's relatively rare. So you can plant it as an ornamental, small ornamental, as you can see by the pictures, and it'll be pest free, but don't expect the fall color that everybody raves about out on the East Coast. And nobody raves about the fruit. The fruit smells horrible. All right. You don't want to see it. There is the fruit. The rotting seed coat of the fruit itself gives off this kind of rancid butter-like odor. It can be almost overpowering sometimes. That's why we can't plant fruiting ginkgos in many communities. Nobody wants to deal with the mess. Interesting enough, the seed that's inside it, which kind of looks like an apricot, it's called silver apricot, and they make a soup out of it. It's kind of an acquired taste, kind of like lutefisk, but nevertheless, you can make a soup out of something that smells pretty bad. But if you're looking for a small ornamental, it's a nice tree. And if you want a very small ornamental, look at this one. This is a ginkgo that only gets 18 inches tall. You've all got room for an 18-inch tall ginkgo tree. All right, well, what can we grow? And this should get some boos and hisses because as I'm sure you're all aware, there's a lot of people out there talking about the green glacier. The fact that our eastern red cedar and our Rocky Mountain juniper are occurring in a lot of areas we don't want them to grow. Mostly pasture land, of course, and then some wooded areas and some riparian areas. And I will admit it can become invasive if you're not managing it. But let's talk about its positives today. And that is, if you're looking at eastern red cedar, it tolerates alkaline and salty soils, saline soils. It's a zone 3 tree. It's best planted east river. It doesn't take the severe droughts we can see west river. So I really prefer eastern red cedar, stay east of the river, though going a little into Gregory County, of course. But the drier west, you're probably better off going with its counterpart, and that is the Rocky Mountain juniper. Now, Rocky Mountain juniper is the reverse. If we plant that east river, sometimes we end up with a lot of needle diseases because it's more humid out here. So generally speaking, you're always safe to keep for shelter belts, keeping eastern red cedar east of the Missouri and Rocky Mountain juniper west of it. And you're going to find that's where they operate best. Now, yes, they can seed into areas we don't want, but on the other hand, take a look down here at the Windbreaks suitability groups. And you're going to see that on each tree that can be used as a windbreak. And if you're not familiar with these, I thought I'd just write it out here. If you're one, it may be poorly drained, but let's say it's well drained to poorly drained. Three is an excellent soil, along with five. So one, three, and five, you're going to see written down for lots of trees. Four, it's an upland. It may be a little dry. They're clay soils, but still a reasonably good site. But I want you to look at 6, 7, 8, and 9. As you're going down that list, you're getting droughtier and droughtier sites. And I want you to notice both the eastern red cedar and the Rocky Mountain juniper can actually grow on those really tough soils. So sometimes we're really left with that tree. There isn't anything else that will perform as a windbreak on those real droughty soils. I will mention this. You all know I put up a chart and say, well, be careful when these plants are distributed across the globe. Guess what? Juniper's one of them. I know it sounds crazy, but I actually worry about some pests coming in from Asia, for example, and ended up in affecting our junipers. Now, I'm not saying not to plant them by any means, and we do need to plant them in some locations. But it wouldn't surprise me if maybe years from now we find we're getting some pest in from somewhere, some Europe or Asia or even North Africa, and it's affecting our trees. So just always be aware when you've got something distributed across the entire globe, that means we can have pests from the entire globe eventually end up here. American arborvitae we don't typically use as windbreaks. Note that I do include it down here because it is noted that. Frankly, I see it a little farther north in Manitoba being used more than South Dakota. One problem we have is they will winter burn. They don't like dry, desiccating winds in the winter, and they're affected by it. They'll take alkaline soils, but not saline soils. Salty soils, they're gone. So for the most part, we use these as ornamentals, planting them in protected communities rather than out blocking the wind. In fact, we need something else to block the wind for them. And they are not really drought tolerant at all. We lost a lot of these a few years ago when we had a dry fall and an open winter. And the number of places I stopped to look at desiccation injury on arborvitaes, it was amazing. I mean, it would be almost daily. Well, what about bald cypress? Well, bald cypress is a deciduous evergreen, and I took that picture of one down in San Antonio, but there's one in Yankton, and here's one in Brookings. I took that yesterday. They're deciduous evergreens, so it's starting to drop as needles. That's not a sick tree, it's just coloring. Now, we've planted them in Brookings for what, 8 or 9 years so far, and they seem to be growing well. Plant them as a novelty, yes. Plant them as a windbreak, no. But if you want to try something unusual, bald cypress seems to be, with our slightly milder winters, seems to be doing okay for an interest tree, for a novelty tree, small tree in a yard south of Brookings. Yeah, consider it. And there's a 30-foot tall one down in Yankton, so they can get some size down in that area. Now, the other one, just not to try at all, is dawn redwood. There's one in Yankton. It's dead now. We get a few in Brookings, they tend to die. The only reason I mention it is, believe it or not, there are people that have planted this for windbreaks, particularly down in the southwestern part of our state. They go online, find about this miracle tree that has no pest, which is true. What they don't realize is they're buying a tree that's really more of a zone 6 or certainly a zone 5 tree that likes evenly moist soil. And so dawn redwood's more of an annual in South Dakota than a permanent tree. So again, walk by this one. If you want to try something exotic, try bald cypress. Dawn redwood is a wonderful tree, and if you all lived in Ohio, yes, but not in the Dakotas. Well, what about fir trees? Again, there is global distribution. That's one of the things I want to point out. For all our conifers, they're distributed across the entire globe. So it doesn't matter whether you're fir or pine or spruce or juniper, those are all carrying a risk. So just be aware of the risk. We do have to plant evergreens, but they're more vulnerable to exotic threats than really our deciduous trees because of their global distribution. Uh, Balsam fir I'm mentioning, it's not used as a windbreak, so you don't see the numbers there. It does not tolerate poorly drained soils, and it may winter burn and suffers from our heat. So I occasionally see this being planted as ornamentals, but it's not very well adapted to the state. Having said that, we have a monster one down in Del Rapids. It's huge, but it's kind of a fluke. You don't usually expect them to do this. Generally, they look more like this. Now, admittedly, it got that big, but that is a balsam fir that was attempting to grow in Faith, South Dakota. And it did reach some size, but unfortunately, our winters are getting warmer, and this tree has been dying back for about the last 15 years. So balsam fir, maybe up in Roberts County, maybe up in the northern hills, but beyond that, It's not really ideally suited, though there is some Christmas tree production at the very eastern extent and down in Lincoln County, for example. Beautiful foliage to it too, though, if you can grow it. The cones are kind of unusual. They shatter at maturity. So unless you're looking at the right time, you'll never see cones on fir trees. They fall apart. Now look at this one. I drove by that for years thinking it was a blue spruce. This is just crossing the Missouri River. You leave Chamberlain, you crossed it, you stop at Al's Oasis. That's at Al's Oasis. That's a white fir tree. It's growing in the perfect location, protected from the winds. It's getting water. I do not recommend this as a windbreak species. I've seen it used as a windbreak species in southeastern Nebraska, but unfortunately here, and it does require good sites, we get winter burn. There's one in Brookings, and if you look at it now, about half of it's dead. So this is really more of an in-town tree, attractive foliage, but as a windbreak, no, and as an ornamental tree, better be in the southeast or out in the hills, and protected. You do not want to get the winter winds on most of our fir trees, including this one. And again, the upright cones. Now, good luck finding this, but it's getting more popular with Christmas tree growers, so availability is getting out there. And this is Korean fir. It's kind of a nice tree. There's some big ones. Were some big ones in western Minnesota, for example. But it will winter burn, doesn't tolerate poorly drained soils at all, but has incredibly attractive foliage. There are some cultivars that have this white underside. If you want to plant a Korean fir, and we do have some on campus, we lost them all in a cold snap 10 years ago and have replanted. Planted as a novelty because we may just get one of those winters, and by winters, I mean spring, where the temperature suddenly drop and we lose these trees because they may bud out a little too early. Subalpine fir is kind of an interesting tree. It's not usually used as a windbreak, but it is used as a Christmas tree. But I think it really has some possibilities out there. It grows in Montana. There's one growing in town in Billings. Really interesting foliage. But look at this. There's a subalpine fir and a balsam fir we planted a few years ago on campus. And you can see, even with irrigation, the balsam fir is fading out because of the heat. But the subalpine fir actually seems to thrive. There's some nice ones all the way up to Jamestown, North Dakota, for example. Can it be planted in hot, dry locations? No, but it's far more adaptable than the balsam fir or the concolor fir to our area. And if you're really looking for a nice ornamental, there's a Korean subalpine fir cross, which gives you the nice color of the subalpine, but the site tolerance of the Korean. Well, what about larch? I was out in some of the larch forests in northern China. That's where we're working in. And larch is the same way as the rest, global distribution. So pests can move from anywhere to anywhere. But Siberian larch is one heck of a tree. Now, Big Sue's going to have stock out 2027. They've had some before, but it ought to be a tree you're able to get. For windbreaks, it does require good sites, and it doesn't perform well on really dry locations. Now, really dry. I've planted in some West River locations where it seems to do okay, even down in Bennett County. But it's not as drought tolerant as some people wish it were, but it's pretty close to it. Um, it's an interesting tree in that it drops its needles in the fall. So admittedly, it looks like a dead spruce all winter. Has very small cones. Okay, very small, kind of like pinky size cones to it. Here it is being used up in Lemon, South Dakota in windbreaks, and it's performing extremely well. But just be careful how dry you plant it. Now, it's winter hardy throughout the states as a zone 2 tree. And in the fall, It has a yellow fall color. Isn't that pretty? But yes, then it's going to drop all its needles. And the Big Sioux, these trees have done fairly well in drought conditions as well. So will it tolerate drought? Yes, but it's still a larch and will not do excessively dry locations. European larch is a little bit more picky. This is one growing in spearfish. As an ornamental, yes, but usually not used as a windbreak. But the Siberian larch, I think, has a lot of promise for a deciduous tree spot in your windbreaks because, again, it drops its needles. Spruce, we plant lots of them. And again, global distribution. Norway spruce, I occasionally see as a windbreak, but it doesn't perform very well because it needs to have the winter winds blocked, not be the blocking. But if you plant it in town, there's beautiful specimens in Rapid City, certainly in Sioux Falls. We've got some nice ones in Brookings. You get down to Yankton, they grow amazingly well, but they don't tolerate wind. And so for a windbreak, they're kind of at a loss. But as a nice ornamental, yes, beautiful tree. They have those long grandfather clock cones on them. So a nice addition. But if you're looking for our most versatile spruce, it's going to be white spruce. There's a native stand of them down by Spearfish. You do tend to find them down along creeks and in cool canyons, but we do use them as windbreak trees throughout the state. I mean, there's some nice plantings up by even Lemon that seem to be doing okay up there on the drier sites. Now, if you're not aware of this, the Big Sioux, they're not going to have bare root Black Hill spruce, which is white spruce. But they will have containers for 2026. So we're going to go through a little hiccup in terms of availability. Now, the best growth is on moist sites. It will tolerate drier sites. But notice it's 1, 3, 5, 4, and 5. 3, 4, and 5 are just really nice sites. And so, yeah, it grows there, but it doesn't grow on the 7s, the 8s, and the 9s, which are really where junipers thrive. I should say thrive. They would like moist soils too, but at least they can make it on those. A small cone, kind of a nice tree, and there are some bizarre forms. Look at that. Weeping white spruce, if you want one that looks like a pole, or the dwarf Alberta spruce. Now, the dwarf Alberta spruce is just a dwarf white spruce, and they get this very compacted form. They do not like the winter. They don't like the winter winds. So definitely a small tree. They get about 5 to 6 feet tall that you want in a protected location rather than being the protection. Colorado spruce, Big Sioux Nursery for next year, their 4.0 stock may be fairly limited. So if that's what you're looking for, you maybe wanted to contact them if you're one of the conservation districts. Best growth, again, is on moist soils. Zone 3, and notice where it grows, about the same as white spruce, though white spruce is a little bit tougher and not as disease prone. This is where Colorado spruce is at its best, in Colorado. A lot of our state, the weather conditions aren't perfect. If you want it as an ornamental, you can grow it. If you want it as a windbreak, they do perform well for at least 20 years. Depending on spacing, you might add another 20 years of that, but just don't plant them too tight. And if you're really looking for blue, the Coster blue spruce as a cultivar is one of the nicest. Look at that blue. Well, Meyer spruce. Meyer spruce has become a little bit more popular in the last 20 years. I saw this tree on the grasslands of Mongolia, I think in 21 or 22, excuse me, 01 or 02. I think it was late 01. I got over there after 911. But it's been planted in Minnesota since the 80s. So it's not a new tree, but it's becoming more popular. It's a little slower growing than the white spruce and the blue spruce. It does have great color to it, as you can see. It's a nice looking tree. Cones are bigger than blue spruce. Beautiful, but some people are disappointed in the growth rate. If you're getting a foot per year out of Colorado spruce, you're probably getting 9 inches a year out of the Meyer spruce. So it does take a little bit longer to grow. But I think it's well worth it. It does not have the same pest problems that Colorado spruce does, and Colorado spruce gets everything. The needle cast diseases, it gets Itospora canker, it gets needle minor, it gets bud scale, it gets everything, especially after they get over mature, which is usually beginning at age 20. And again, beautiful foliage. Larger cone though than what you see on the blue spruce. But here's the other problem. I like them and so do deer. That is a Meyer spruce in a windbreak next to a cedar belt. And the deer will chomp on these when they're little. When they get older, no, not so much. But look at that. They made these into little beach balls and they'll nip them every year because the needles are softer than the sharp, prickly needles of the Colorado spruce. Now, by the way, I've seen deer go after white spruce too, but it seems like they'll really go after the Meyer spruce. So just a note of caution. You're not going to be able to find this. You're not going to be able to buy it, but I thought I'd toss it out there. This is Korean spruce, and I think this has some possibilities, and I do want to collect seed in my next trip over there. Here's one growing in Beijing. The needles are shorter than the Meyers, but are also blunt. Cones are a little bit smaller. It just seems to be fairly close in appearance to the Meyers, but actually can withstand harsher conditions. Um, Here's a whole nursery of them for their desertification project. In other words, planting these out on drier sites to help hold the sands, and they're planting Korean spruce for that location. And the Korean spruce actually comes from a more northern area. That's that red circle up there, than the more mountainous or plains area for the Meyer spruce. And so I think once we get some seed in here and maybe grow some seedlings, let's see how it performs. It might be another possibility, but that's at least a decade away before we know for sure. Serbian spruce is an ornamental. You're not going to be planting it as a windbreak. It's a zone 4 or 5 tree, so it's kind of iffy, but it's one of our prettier spruces for a landscape garden. It has this white underside to the spruce, and for all you trivia people, this is the flat-needled spruce. It doesn't have the four-sided needle that's so common with other spruce. It does well from about Highway 14 south until you cross the river. And then it really doesn't do well until you get out to the Black Hills again. But here's a nice planting of them in Huron. So, I mean, in Huron, yep, it does well. Further north, I haven't seen it, though I haven't looked in everybody's yard. But we're starting to get definite zone 4 up there, and I doubt if it will perform well. But boy, I love the foliage. I mean, they do well in Brookings here. If you're looking for a small tree, by small, maybe 25 feet at maturity, it's not going to grow nearly as tall as it does out east. Limber pine, I was really pleased to see limber pine on that list coming up for the Big Sioux Nursery for the conservation districts. I think this tree has some real possibilities as well. It is native to South Dakota. It's found up in the spires in the Black Hills. Notice, like many of our conifers, it's the 1, 3, 4, and 5 for suitability groups. You'll notice kind of a common trend for a lot of these. Best growths on loam soils, but it can tolerate a little bit more open, more gravelly soil as well. Again, we grow them in Brookings. They form quite well. Here they are growing out in Billings, Montana, because they're native out there. So you can find them out in the open kind of savannas. So they will take dry conditions, drier than many other trees. And there's one of the native ones growing up in the spires. We've actually GPSed all of them, all 141 trees, from seedlings to mature trees, and we're kind of monitoring their health and seeing what we can do to improve it. The problem with this tree is it can get white pine blister rust. And so while I think it has some possibilities, there is the risk that the tree might get this fatal disease. Now, the disease occurs out in the Black Hills. And so we have to go out and prune these trees to cut off infected branches before it goes to the trunk. We have limber pines on the east part of the state. I've not seen the disease in the eastern part of the state, but nevertheless, that is a possibility. Eastern white pine, not a windbreak tree because it will winter burn, so it needs protection from the wind rather than being the protection. But what a gorgeous tree. I mean, I love the layered appearance. They can get to be 60 feet tall easily. Here's one in Brookings doing well. Here's one in two in Gettysburg. That's about as far north as I would try it, but believe it or not, there's actually a nice one in Midland, South Dakota. I even had to stop and look at it. I was so surprised to see one growing there. I think that's pushing the envelope, but they have a little protection from the winds there, so it would grow. But I'd call this southeastern South Dakota, maybe up on the Coteau, and then out into the Black Hills. But where you can grow it, it's a nice tree. Beautiful long cones to it, very soft needles. Well, ponderosa pine, it's obviously 1.2 million acres of timberland in the Black Hills. And we do plant it. Here's a beautiful one in Spearfish. I want you to look at that list. It's again one of the trees we can plant on those real harsh sites. In fact, interesting enough, ponderosa pine, if you give it really good soil, doesn't perform as well than on, let's say, a little drier soils. I don't mean excessively dry, but a little drier sites, a little gravelier sites. If you drive out in the Black Hills, everywhere they made a road cut, what's coming up on the side? Thousands of ponderosa pines, because they're really well adapted to that. And in windbreaks, frankly, this is your pine now. Uh, Ponderosa pine is really our best tree, best pine tree for survival in South Dakota. So we're going to get down to just using this one tree. And then obviously we have our forest of it in the Black Hills. Well, why are we down to it? Because we're not planting as much Scots pine or Scotch pine, whichever you prefer. Now, I love this tree. Notice it's getting on those 6 soils. I've seen some gorgeous ones in Bennett County where I used to see them. They've all been killed by pine wilt disease. Pine wilt disease is through the entire state now. And the nematode that carries the disease, that is the disease, is native to North America. It only kills the exotic pines. So it's wiping out Scots pines. When they get about 10 feet tall, any taller, that disease can take over. It's carried by a Sawyer beetle. And again, throughout the entire state, we're wiping out. And what's interesting, I've seen belts where they've alternated Scots pines and ponderosa. All the Scots pines are dead. So use it with extreme caution because I can find this everywhere. When I found it north of Lemon, I knew we were done. Because it was wiping out belts there as well, though it is a tough tree. But that one and Austrian pine are pretty much on our no list now. It'll take tougher sites, but it really doesn't matter because once they get some size, we're losing them to pine wilt disease. And that's a row of infested ones in Huron, South Dakota. And what the disease does, the tree looks good in the spring, looks like this in the fall. It kills them that quickly. And we'll be able to extract that nematode out of that wood. You'll also see blue staining. So while I like Scots pine, very versatile tree, could tolerate harsher sites than many other conifers, unfortunately, it's being killed throughout the state by pine wilt disease. Well, we do have a couple of other pines. Now, this is a native pine, by that native to North America. In fact, lodgepole is native to the Black Hills. There's about 250 acres of it. in the central hills. But these do tolerate sandier soils, but they need irrigation to be established. I like to see them dripped for at least a few years to get them established, and then they'll take the drier sites. Again, though, notice we don't have sixes and sevens down for these. They still do best on the, let's say, the moisture sites. And the same with jack pine. They're very difficult to tell apart. They do have some possibilities. There's one growing in Gettysburg, but probably fairly limited. They have this cone that stays closed until you get fire. So it's very common to look at a tree and find all these cones that are just hanging from it unopened. And if you want a cultivar of lodgepole, look at this, Taylor sunburst. Yes, it's supposed to look like that. Taylor sunburst. It's not going to get to be a big tree, but the new growth comes out that color. You decide whether you like that color. And then after a year, that color fades to green, but the new growth that comes out is this kind of yellowish color. And that's hence the name sunburst. Um, we plant a lot of mugo pines. If they're an upright tree form, they're known as Swiss mountain pines. Okay, the upright ones. I don't see them in windbreaks too much, but they can be used on the better soils. These can get tall enough, above 10 feet, where they're attractive to the beetle that is carrying pine wilt. So this is an exotic pine, and so I can find it being killed by pine wilt disease, particularly the big ones. Look at that one in Mobridge, taller than the house. And again, those are being killed as well. If they're mounded like this, we call them mugo pines. If they're upright Christmas tree, we call them Swiss mountain pines, but they're both mugo pines. A couple of others just real quick. If you want a novelty, bristlecone pine. It'll grow out in the Black Hills. It'll grow in East River. There's a picture of one down in Chadron at the school, Chadron State College down there. It's kind of interesting ornamental. I see them up by Skyline in Rapid City being used up there. And if you ever go into Shields out there, they got two of them just outside the door. And then we have them growing in Brookings, South Dakota, and you certainly see them in Yankton, and you see them all the way out to Chamberlain even, but not much farther north. And this one you don't even see in the state. We had one. They cut it down to expand the building in Yankton. So as far as I know, we do not have any lace bark pines. That's the closest one I can find in Norfolk, Nebraska. It has interesting bark that kind of peels off it, kind of an exfoliating bark. That's kind of unusual for a pine, but best look south of here, the state, in order to find one. Yeah, but if someone knows of one, I'd sure like to hear about it. And we don't use this as a windbreak. It hasn't performed as well as it has in Minnesota. And by the way, it's the state tree of Minnesota. Maybe that explains it. We do have some nice ones. We've got a windbreak of them just south of Brookings. It's a two-needle pine where ponderosas 2 and 3. It's not affected by pine wilt, so maybe it's one we're going to start experimenting with on the very eastern edge of the state for a possibility as a windbreak species. Well, we're kind of wrapping up the trees. Doug fir, I love this tree. Nathan Conifer and I were doing a workshop last night, and we were both saying we wish more people would be planting it. You go to any old cemetery and you look at that big spruce out there, I'll bet it's a Doug fir. They were planted a lot until about the 40s, and then it just stopped, and I can't find a reason as to why. It just lost interest. Now, again, this was for the better soils. So you're not it's not a tough tree, but on your better soils, it's another possibility. Here's one growing in Brookings. It's doing quite nicely. Doug firs are, again, not globally distributed very much, so I don't really worry about them. So go ahead and plant them. And here's a windbreak of them in Sioux Falls. It's got more possibilities, but it's got to be planted on the better soils. Whether a cemetery, whether a town, or a windbreak. And by the way, there's a beautiful one about 40 feet tall in lemon. So it's got more possibilities than we realize. And we had a self-seeding stand of it down by Palmer Creek, but I can't find it now. It looks like they did a harvest down there, so I think we lost. It wasn't a native stand, but it was a self-seeding stand of Doug fir. Nice soft needles too. And look at that weird cone. We call it squished rats, the bracts that hang from it. Okay, you're not planning this, but I'm kind of just about at the end. And I mention these just like the dawn redwoods. People say, "Hey, can I grow this?" No. This is eastern hemlock. Now we have two in Brookings. I know of three in Sioux Falls. There is one outside of Fargo, by outside, still in a community. Does not like our winters, does not like our summer heat. That's a fairly nice one growing over in Minnesota. Um, Here's the way they grow best in the shade of taller trees. That's over by Waseca. I think that's about 45 years old. But as an ornamental in our yard or as a windbreak, believe it or not, people say, well, I'm going to plant it as a windbreak. It does really nice out in Virginia. This isn't Virginia. It doesn't like our winters. And I'll finish with this one. It doesn't like our winters either. This is a yew, Japanese yew. We can plant it. There's some 20 footers down in Yankton. But no, we don't get the 30 or 40 footers. And even the ones that'll get 6 feet tall or so, they do not make good windbreaks that we get a lot of winter burn. These are north side only and protected from the winter wind. And you got a real nice little evergreen. But for an evergreen windbreak, nope. It needs something else to block the wind for it. And it doesn't do well in our winter sun, so hence a north side location. And they will grow well in shade, but they will not tolerate wet feet. If the soils are wet, these plants will die very quickly. And then I've got to mention this. Now, that's not a true berry, but that is the fruit, as we call it, and the seed of a yew. The reason I mention it is you don't see the seeds very often because the species dioecious. So we plant ones that produce pollen or we plant ones that produce fruit. We don't want the fruit. The fruit's okay, but the little seed inside of it, and there'll be a couple, think of it as a carrot seed, highly toxic, highly toxic. You do not eat the seed. Concern is you bite down, you chew on the seed, breaks it open, produces taxin, which can be a heart depressant. So, I mean, we can leave it. Most people wouldn't chomp on it to begin with, though they do look like little cherries. But I'll also point out this is good at killing livestock. We did have a situation where there was a storm. Everybody cut down their trees. A farmer allowed people to haul all the brush out to one of his pastures. Somebody hauled out ewes and they dried for a bit. And they came up and chewed on them, killed 15 cows, dairy cows. Yeah. Now, guess what? Deer can eat them and don't suffer any effects. So you're saying, hey, what about deer? Deer love them. So not good for getting rid of deer. Well, with that, I want to make sure we have time for question here. As Tony mentioned, right at 2, I do have to split. Usually we're finished by then anyway. But for all our ISA certified arborists, I do want to point out that your ISA code is DS25 026. Now, again, that only applies to ISA certified arborists. Okay, Tony.
Very well. I don't have too many questions in the chat right now. Eric chimed in that the Rocky Mountain subalpine fir was lost in a windstorm earlier this June. They also tried
Oh,
lace bark pine and they have a Doug fir as well.
okay. All right. Lace bark is kind of an unusual plant. I mean, I do see them in Iowa being used and a couple of others. So that's nice. Doug fir, as I say, I can find it. Well, there's some nice ones in Selby, for example. There's some nice ones in Britain. You can find them in Ipswich. Some of our tallest ones are in Aberdeen, South Dakota. Now, admittedly, those are all in town and on very good soils, but it is being used for a windbreak kind of sparingly in the southeast, south of 14 and to the river. So depending on the district, they may want to try it or not, but I think it's as an ornamental in a yard, absolutely. It's a great tree.
Joanne is curious, what about Tannenbaum pine?
Okay. Actually, I showed that one. I'll even go back to it, which we can do. I didn't bother to mention it as the cultivar. That's Tannenbaum right there. That's why we call it a Swiss mountain pine. But the Tannenbaum Mugo pine, it's a cultivar of Mugo pine, does form that Christmas tree shape, but as a little Christmas tree. By little, we've got some on campus that are about 15 feet tall. And Tannenbaum was developed or released, I should say, from South Dakota State University. It was one of Norm Evert's projects, and it became a bestseller. A beautiful plant. Now, once it starts getting some size, though, it may be attacked by the Sawyer beetles that carry the pine wood nematode. So I wouldn't overplant it, but certainly as an ornamental, it's beautiful. I've got some right outside our building here that I planted just before the pandemic. They're all doing extremely well. So yeah, Tannenbaum is a cultivar of Mugo, the Swiss mountain pine. Good question. Thank you for asking that one.
And that seems to be all the questions we have at this point. A couple
Okay.
more may come in here. Brandon, our friend in Custer State Park there, shared that the Pacific Yew is the original source of the chemo drug Taxol. Fun fact.
Yeah, it is. And thank you for Brandon mentioning that. In fact, years ago, there were people literally going in the forest and stripping the bark off the trees, killing them. Uh, to get this. Now, of course, they've synthesized it and developed a form that doesn't require them for cutting them down, but that is one very well defended plant. By that, it does produce a lot of chemicals. Some of the chemicals we've used to our advantage. Some of the chemicals would be bad. Don't eat the foliage. Not that I would expect anyone to put it in their salad, but it is one. If a branch breaks, so it concentrates the toxins and cattle or horses chew on it, you can kill them. So it is a little bit on the toxic side. Don't put it near pens.
We have one more question in here from Bob. Bob is northwest of Aberdeen out on a farmstead, and he wants to plant new conifers in an old windbreak. Other than Eastern red cedar, do you have a couple of top recommendations for him?
Well, did you say northwest of Aberdeen? Did I hear that right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. If this were 20 years ago, I'd put Scots pines in there because they do great. But since we're able to find pine wilt disease in Aberdeen and other areas, it's wiping out areas of their Scots pines. That's kind of a no now. Ponderosa pine, you've got some beautiful belts of ponderosa pine up there. And if the soil is not too droughty, um, white spruce does well. I've seen that being utilized up there. And you certainly could plant the Siberian larch, keeping in mind that's not your evergreen row because they do drop their needles. But those are three reasonably tough plants that I would consider up in that area.
Now, Kayla wrote in, did you have any recommendations for weed control under a conifer?
Yeah, that'll be maybe a good fall talk. since we do have people going out there and doing it.
Hmm.
The biggest thing is for weed control, are we talking established or new plantings? So for everyone listening or watching, there's a lot of pre-emergent herbicides that we do use that are labeled for conifers, and you can use them on seedlings, but here's the trick. You have to plant the seedling, water it in, pack the ground so there's no air gaps. So let it sit for a bit, but then apply the herbicide, Princep, for example, as a pre-emergent before everything breaks bud. But if you put it down too soon, that one, even Treflan, can injure roots because the roots are just starting to grow and there's air gaps there. So that's one. If you're looking at an established belt, and you wait another couple of weeks while things go dormant, there's a fair number of herbicides that can be used with proper caution in windbreak rows to get thistles out in that. However, that does not include Tordon. And Milestone's another one that'll say right on their label, do not use around conifers. So be very careful on the list. But you know what, Tony? Let's make that the October talk,
I like it.
is going over those for fall, and then again next spring, weed control. Weed control in existing shelter belts. Boom.
Perfect. Perfect. And with that, I don't see any more questions. I'll make one more call for SAF Forester credentials, your SAF certified forester number. We had the ISA certified arborist code up on the screen there to be self-reported. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next month.
All right, thanks everybody.